road crossing.
Justice, you need to dismantle property rights. For land justice, sometimes they say. Or people who say this is stolen land. So quite clearly, if it's stolen, we want it back. So the attack on property rights is itself couched in the language of justice. And so we have to ask in that context, is that really just? It's not just about the label. Anybody can call anything justice, but we need some kind of benchmark or standard or guidepost to tell us whether what people call justice really is just. So that's one of the questions that I want to look at. The precise form of the claim that's mounted in relation to property rights varies, but the gist of it is that the British Empire was founded on theft. So anything that they can trace to the legacies of empire, they will call the legacy of stolen property, the legacy of theft. And the idea is that any resources that flow from that are resources that have been acquired from theft. And critically, that some form of wealth redistribution is now required to redress that theft that historically occurred. So that's the gist of the claim. And the reason why I've said from the British Empire is because I also want to emphasize the double standards that we see when people talk about redressing historical injustice. They're not looking at, what the Romans did to England. They're looking at specific claims of injustice that derive from the legacy of empire. So in that context, I want to ask, what is meant by land justice? How can we ascertain whether entire cities are built on stolen land, as we have seen some cities now, city authorities declaring that the city...
You have been off the route for about 3 miles.
To ascertain whether that is the case.
Route recalculated. Distance 17 miles. Time is 30 minutes. Continue for about 1 mile to Y164 State Highway 164.
Not just a question of saying that was a theft. We have to ask what is the appropriate remedy. And we want to be sure that the remedy is just. So that's really what I'm looking at in my lecture today. Now,
after 9/10 of a mile, turn right onto Y164 State Highway 164.
Chicago Law Journal. The Columbia Law Journal from 1922 by Earl C. Arnold, where he says, it is an elementary proposition of law of all civilized communities that no person can be deprived of his property except by his own voluntary act, this much we know, or by operation of law. And that's where it starts to get tricky when we say by operation of law. Because law can be, and these days tends to be anything that people say. Every day in the news there's somebody saying, we need a new law to do this, and we need a new law to do the other. So when we say you can be deprived of your property by operation of law, that can't be the end of the question. We must still ask,
in 2/10 of a mile, turn right onto Y164 State Highway 164.
What we can learn about that from the Ethics of Liberty. I'm looking here for a normative guidepost from the Ethics of Liberty.
Turn right onto Y164 State Highway 164.
Or what anybody wishes, or the world as anybody wishes it would be. Justice, as I define it, is to give each man his own. To give each man his own. I say as I define it because even though this comes from Justinian's principles, I know that classical scholars debate exactly what the old...
After 9/10 of a mile, turn left.
It means to give each man his own, or whether it means give each man his due. Because of course if you say to give each man his due, then we can debate what is his due. I define it as to give each man his own, meaning property, things that belong to a person. And here again, John Locke would agree with that. Every man has a property in his own person, and things that are derived from his own labor. And Rothbard in the Ethics of Liberty sets this out in 3 elements, that each man has ownership of his own self, of unused resources that he has occupied and transformed. So we're going to be talking a lot today about what that means to occupy and transform, and also has ownership of titles derived by voluntary exchange or...
In 2/10 of a mile, turn left.
And notice that this is the distinction I wanted to draw. He doesn't go on to say, or by operation of law. It is simply what you own, unused resources
turn left,
transformed, or titles derived by voluntary exchange or gift. And this just highlights how important it is to ensure that law is just, because that's where all the problems begin. So that's an outline of what I'm going to do.
Continue for 11 miles to I-41, I-43, I-894, US 41, then turn slightly right onto exit 5AB, Port 76 84th Street.
Cases, I'm looking for the normative values that should underpin the law. And for the rules here, I'm looking at the English common law tradition. What do I mean by that? I mean the tradition of law that has been developed by courts as distinct from legislation or statutes. And then I'm looking at this in the context of cultural laws. I think all of us who read newspapers know what's going on, but I have a few examples to give, because the point I really want to highlight about cultural laws is that the threat to private property doesn't just come from the outrageous things like people say. I mean, people can say anything, and they do. They say, I want my justice. distinguish between civil law and criminal law. I thought this was an important clarification to make because I know in the libertarian framework we don't have these artificial distinctions between the civil and the criminal, or between the different causes of action, whether a claim arises in property, in contract, or in court, which is very important, of course, in looking at the way law actually functions in the courts. So I'm not dealing here with the common law that concerns crime. I realize theft is a crime, but I'm dealing with claims in private law, in civil law, where people are just asking for the return of their property. They're asking for some restitution. They're not asking for a criminal to be locked up. In the Ethics of Liberty, Rothbard says a criminal is anyone who initiates violence against another man and his property. This I think we know. And he adds, anyone who uses the coercive political means for the acquisition of goods and services. That, in Rothbard's view, is also a criminal. So this is not somebody who's, shown up with a, weapon to say, your money or your life, but it's somebody who uses the political means to get you to pay taxes that will be used to fund reparations. That is a criminal as well, because they're using political means to acquire goods and services. So I realize that in the libertarian framework, the criminal has the sense of anybody who uses aggression to take your property, and that's the sense in which I understand.
After 9/10 of a mile, turn slightly right onto I-41, I-43, I-894, US 41 towards 76 84th Street.
This process of the common law, which is a tradition that decides a case between two opposing parties that are before the court. This is really important to mention because not all legal systems work this way. I know, for example, continental European jurisdictions have an inquisitorial function where if there's a dispute,
in 4/10 of a mile, turn slightly right onto exit 5AB, towards 76 84th Street, then keep right.
the region owns this property. In the common law, it's a case you could have, for example, a case between two squatters. Neither of them.
Turn slightly right onto exit 5AB, towards 76 84th Street. In 3/10 of a mile, turn right onto South 84th Street, then keep left.
And the judge can't just say to them, the two of you are both squatters, so be gone. Okay, the judge will have to
turn right onto South 84th Street.
So this is something that we have to be aware of. The common law does not follow the Roman concept of dominium, of ownership. It's rooted in possession.
In 2/10 of a mile, turn left onto West Leyden Avenue.
Who is the owner? And remedies in the common law are also really important and artificially linked to causes of action. So if you bring your claim in property,
turn left onto West Leyden Avenue.
There are different remedies that you can get. If you bring your claim in contract, you are 99% of the time going to get your remedy in money damages. Whereas if you bring your claim in property, you don't want money, you want the thing that you're asking for. So of course in the libertarian framework, we don't have to worry about that. I think Rothbard talks about this in the Ethics of Liberty. You can give the appropriate remedy. But in the common law, you do have to worry about that, because if you bring a contractual claim and you win, you can't say to the judge, I want the thing, because you should take your remedy in money. So these are things that we need to think about when we are evaluating how the common law stacks up against what is just. We then also have to look at principles of equity. I have quoted here from the Encyclopedia Britannica because I wish to emphasize that equity in law has a meaning.
Attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
I realize the word equity has been co-opted by the types of people who like to use words that will beguile and that will make people think this is a very good thing. And so they take a word and they stick it as a label on something.
In 2/10 of a mile, turn right onto CTHU South 76th Street.
Which now
attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
Equal outcomes for everyone, which is of course not what the word equity means in law.
Turn right onto CTHU South 76th Street.
Outside the common law or coded law, it's a jurisdiction you could say in conscience, or a jurisdiction in fairness. The common law has no concept of good faith. Okay, if you take some
attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
You have to give it back.
Continue for about 3 miles to CTHVB West Rawson Avenue.
But it is relevant in equity. It could be relevant. It may be relevant in equity. So that's what I'm referring to here.
Attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
Cases. It was a very established system of law by the 14th century.
Attention, pedestrian crosswalk. Attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
Not simply a matter of the judge deciding what do I think justice requires. The judge must follow precedent in exactly the same way as the common law. But it's really important to bear those two legal jurisdictions in mind because often Rothbard's view of what the law should
attention,
be.
Pedestrian crosswalk. Attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
Roman law, but not what principles of equity say, because equity introduces principles of good faith. So we're going to see how that makes a difference to some of the outcomes to these cases. So the common law is rooted in the idea of relativity of title. This is the first thing that we really have to think about, because the idea of ownership in the Ethics of Liberty is a universal and absolute idea. Your property rights give you an absolute entitlement to the thing, whereas in the common law, it's a relative idea. It's a cherished tenet of the common law. In fact, this example is taken from American law, but it's a cherished tenet of the common law that a thief,
attention, pedestrian crosswalk,
stolen property. It's as simple as that. There is no ifs or buts. A thief acquires no title to stolen property. Normally, a thief has title not even to a good faith purchaser. And this is the point I was making about equity bringing in good faith.
Attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
It doesn't matter if the purchaser bought stolen items in good faith. But behind that simple doctrine
crosswalk. Attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
The law started to deviate from the position set out in the Ethics of Liberty, because at common law, yes, a thief can acquire good title, and a good faith purchaser of stolen property.
Attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
Paramount title to the goods. In fact, here, this is a quote from D.A. Thomas on an article on adverse possession. So he's talking about adverse possession, where you acquire title over time. And the idea of adverse possession is mainly statutory, but even in equity, there's an idea that as time passes, you can lose your rights.
Attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
So the idea is that if you, beyond a certain length of time, if you've slept on your rights, your property's gone. I don't know, suppose you abandoned it and then you changed your mind and you came back, it's gone. And you slept on your rights and a court of equity will not intervene in your favor. So already you can see that the idea of title being relative.
After 9/10 of a mile, turn left onto CTHVB West Rawson Avenue.
Absolute ownership for absolute rights to property that we see in the Ethics of Liberty. That's going to be a concern that I would like us to bear in mind
Attention, pedestrian crosswalk.
as we consider the attacks on private property. Social justice has been used as a way of making claims, entitlements to things that people say the reason why they should be given the transfer, wealth transfer that they're asking for, is because social justice demands it. Land justice demands it. We have many
In 3/10 of a mile, turn left onto CTHVB West Rawson Avenue.
where people say there aren't meant to be white people here, therefore I want their farms. And the reason I want the
Turn left onto CTHVB West Rawson Avenue.
they will simply make the claim like that and they will call it justice. And the idea of using the word justice in that way is that people should collapse when they hear the word justice. And it's a really difficult problem for somebody like myself who really thinks justice is important, because you're trying to say no to people who are being ludicrous. But at the same time, you don't want to say justice be gone. Justice is important. Justice matters. We want to uphold justice, but we want to say that isn't justice. Well, what is? When you have people saying
In 2/10 of a mile, turn left, then keep right.
which is actually what's been happening to white farmers in South Africa. There have been mobs gathering at the
Turn left, then in 150 feet, turn right.
chanting war songs and saying to these farmers, you stole my farm, I'm here to
Turn right, then in 50 feet, turn left.
Conflicting claims of theft. We must
You have reached your destination Bowling Center, Root River Center.
as between the two and who's the aggressor. In the Ethics of Liberty, Rothbard gives the example of somebody, I don't know, he describes him as some kind of mugger.